When I first met Jason Miller, I didn't think much of him. He was one of those guys who seemed to float into your life when you least expected it. The kind of person who wasn't on your radar until suddenly, he was right there in your living room, shoes kicked off, sitting on the edge of your couch like he'd been there 1,000 times before. But the truth is, it wasn't supposed to happen that way. I hadn't planned on having anyone stay over, and definitely not Jason. Yet that night changed everything, and even now, I sometimes think back and wonder if maybe fate had a hand in it all. It was a Thursday evening in late October, one of those crisp nights where the air smells faintly of wood smoke and the leaves scatter across the street in little whirlwinds. I had just gotten home from work, exhausted from another long day at the office. I lived in a modest townhouse on the edge of Maplewood, a quiet American town where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business. My life was pretty simple back then. I worked, came home, cooked dinner, and sometimes watched television until I fell asleep on the couch. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing to prepare me for what was about to unfold. Jason wasn't a close friend, not then at least. He was more of a friend, someone I saw occasionally at gatherings or community events. He was tall, with sandy blonde hair and a smile that could light up a room, though most of the time his eyes carried something heavier, something he didn't talk about. That night, I had run into him outside the small grocery store in town. He was carrying nothing but a worn backpack and looked like he hadn't slept well in days. We struck up a conversation, the kind that starts off casual but quickly takes on a tone you can't ignore. He admitted, almost reluctantly, that things hadn't been going well for him. Work had fallen through, he was between places, and for the moment, he didn't really have anywhere to go. Now, I'm not the kind of person who usually invites someone into my home on a whim. I like my space, my routines, my sense of control. But something about the way Jason looked that night, tired, weathered, but still trying to put on a brave face, made me pause. I heard myself offering before I could second-guess it. "If you need a place to crash for the night, I've got a couch." He blinked, clearly surprised, then nodded slowly. "Are you sure?" he asked. And just like that, the evening took a turn I could never have predicted. When we got back to my place, I cleared some blankets from the closet and set them neatly on the couch. Jason gave me a grateful smile, the kind that made me feel like I'd done something right, even if I wasn't entirely sure of it. We ended up talking for a while about work, about life in general, about how quickly things can change. He didn't go into too much detail about what had happened to him, and I didn't push. There was a quiet trust forming between us, the kind that doesn't need every detail spelled out. Eventually, he stretched out on the couch, and I headed upstairs to my room. For a while, I lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar presence in my house. The sound of him shifting on the cushions, the faint creak as he settled in. It was strange, but not uncomfortable. In fact, it felt almost safe. That night, I fell asleep easier than I had in weeks. The next morning, when I came downstairs, I expected to find Jason gone. Instead, he was in the kitchen making coffee. He looked at me with a sheepish grin. "Hope you don't mind. I found the coffee maker." I didn't mind. In fact, it was oddly nice to wake up to the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of someone else moving around the kitchen. He poured me a cup and sat across from me at the table, and for a moment, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. One night turned into 2, and then into a week. Each time I told myself it was temporary, just until he figured things out. But Jason had a way of fitting into the rhythm of my life without disturbing it. He wasn't intrusive, didn't overstep. He helped wash dishes, carried groceries, even fixed the leaky faucet in the bathroom that I'd been ignoring for months. Slowly, the couch became less of a temporary spot and more of a place that belonged to him, at least for the time being. As the days passed, I started to notice things about him I hadn't before. The way he'd hum softly under his breath when he cooked. How he always offered the last slice of pizza, even though I knew he wanted it. How his laughter had a way of filling the room, warm and contagious. But I also noticed the moments when his guard would slip. The quiet stares out the window, the nights he stayed up late scribbling in a worn notebook, the heaviness in his expression when he thought no one was looking. One evening, we were sitting on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the cool night air. I asked him about the notebook. He hesitated, then finally handed it to me. Inside were pages filled with stories, half-finished ones, sketches of characters, bits of dialogue. He told me he used to dream of being a writer, but somewhere along the way, life had gotten in the way. Reading those words, raw and full of emotion, I realized there was so much more to Jason than what anyone saw on the surface. That was the night everything shifted. I didn't expect it, but I found myself opening up too, telling him things I hadn't told anyone else. About the dreams I'd once had, the things I'd given up on because they seemed impractical. We sat there for hours, just talking, until the stars faded and the first light of dawn crept across the sky. By the time we went back inside, I knew things had changed between us. It wasn't just about him staying on the couch anymore. It was about the connection we'd found, something neither of us had been looking for, but both desperately needed. Of course, not everything was easy. There were days when Jason struggled, when the weight of his past and the uncertainty of his future caught up with him. There were moments when I wondered if I had made a mistake, if maybe letting him into my home and my life had been too much. But each time, something reminded me why I had opened that door in the first place. It wasn't about fixing him or saving him. It was about being there, about sharing the space we had, about choosing kindness even when it wasn't convenient. Weeks turned into months, and slowly Jason started to rebuild. He picked up odd jobs, saved what he could, and kept writing. He let me read more of his work, and I encouraged him to keep going, to believe in himself again. In return, he reminded me of my own passions, of the parts of myself I'd buried under routine and responsibility. Together, we found a balance, a friendship, a partnership, something that neither of us had expected but both of us cherished. Looking back now, I realized that letting him sleep on the couch was one of the best decisions I ever made. It taught me that sometimes the smallest choices, the ones that seem insignificant in the moment, can change your life in ways you could never imagine. Jason came into my life when I least expected it, and though I thought I was giving him a place to stay, it turned out he was giving me something too: hope, companionship, and the reminder that it's never too late to chase the things that matter. I let him sleep on the couch. I never expected what came next. But what came next was everything I didn't know I was missing.